I'm Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, relational trauma and the brain. When you hear this expression, alarmed aloneness, what do you feel? I am joined today by Sarah Payton. She's an author, international constellations facilitator, certified trainer of nonviolent communication, and neuroscience educator. She integrates constellations, brain science, and the use of resonant language to heal trauma. Sarah works with audiences internationally to create a compassionate understanding of the effects of relational trauma on the brain and teaches people how words change and heal us. She's dedicated in helping you transform your brain into a kinder, cozier place to live. She's the author of 2 books. Her first book, Your Resonant Self, includes the fundamental neuroscience concepts and some client stories and meditations. And her second book, Your Resonant Self Workbook, builds onto the first book by adding the neuroscience of unconscious contracts, which supports an even deeper movement into self-warmth. We start today's conversation about the importance of naming our feelings. Sarah mentions Matthew Lieberman's research on naming feelings, which decreases the activity in the amygdala. Then she talks about the panic grief circuit of the mammalian brain and explains the phenomenon of alarmed aloneness, why she prefers the expression alarmed aloneness as opposed to separation anxiety or abandonment. We talk about the signs of alarmed aloneness, unconscious contracts that we make with ourselves, and how we can release ourselves from those harmful agreements and live freely. Since she is a neuroscience educator, she talks a little bit about the brain, the hippocampus, and the amygdala informing traumatic memories. Pretty fascinating stuff. And how that we all yearn accompaniment, resonance from other people. She explains the difference between empathy and resonance, and so much more. With her background and all of her trainings, Sarah is such a rich source of knowledge and information and wisdom, and this is truly a fascinating conversation. I took a quote from her website. It says, "We humans are uniquely vulnerable to emotional harm, but we're also uniquely able to hold each other and ourselves with warmth and resonance in ways that reestablish real relationships and engage our brain's capacity for healing." I think that sums up today's conversation very well. But before we get to today's episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most nutrient-dense whole food daily supplement that I've ever tried. As you know, I'm a huge advocate for cultivating and practicing what I call radical self-care. If you want to show up greatly in your parenting, you need to take care of yourself. And part of radical self-care is eating right. With so many stressors in our lives, in our go, 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 do culture, juggling busy schedules and multitude of responsibilities, maintaining a healthy, well-balanced diet can be difficult, especially for parents. That can leave us deficient in key nutrients that our bodies need to thrive. This is where Athletic Greens can help. It's a life-changing nutritional habit. Their daily all-in-one superfood powder is your nutritional essential. One thing with all the best things. I've been taking it for the past 2 years as part of my morning routine, and I love how simple it is, and it tastes delicious too. One tasty scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced ingredients, probiotics, and more that all work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid with digestion, and support a healthy immune system, all without the need to take multiple products or pills. I take it in the morning and I'm ready to face the day. And right now, for the listeners of my podcast, Athletic Greens has a special offer. A free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Simply visit athleticgreens.com/authentic parenting and you will be able to access this offer. Again, simply visit athleticgreens.com/authentic parenting and get your free supply of vitamin D for a year and 5 free travel packs. And now, please enjoy my conversation with Sarah Payton. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. It is my deepest honor to have you here, and I'm just delighted where this conversation is going to go.
I'm very happy to be here, Anna. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I know you're one of those people who bring so much depth and richness. And I'm like, wow, where do I even go? This is interesting. This part is interesting. Maybe I should ask her about this. Maybe no. How about this? And I just couldn't narrow it down, because you're such a wealth of knowledge and the way you speak, it's, your calm, warm presence. But I know where I want to begin. I see musical notes, sheet music behind you, and I see a beautiful musical instrument, cello, which is one of my favorite instruments. So do you play the cello?
Yes, when I was 50, I decided that I got to do what I'd always wanted to do, which was to play the cello, because I had really not gifted musically.
Here goes with the self-criticism.
So I always thought, well, I could never figure out the notes on the cello because there are no frets. But then I just decided, well, I'm 50 and nobody's going to expect me to be able to do anything, so I can just do whatever I want. Yeah, that was almost 9 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I mean, you disclosed your age. You disclosed that you have negative self-critic inside of you. I love it. So what do you play? Do you take lessons? Do you do it on your own? I'm curious because I am self-taught piano player as well.
Oh, beautiful. I take lessons and during the pandemic, I've been doing Zoom lessons.
Excellent. Yeah. I may have to put you on the spot and in the end ask you to play something.
Oh, that was the beauty of becoming 50 was I knew that I could always, now I'm old enough to say, no, I'm sorry. I don't play the cello for anyone.
Oh, I love it. I love that. I love that. Oh, I'm happy to hear that age is just a number. At any age we can. This is already a wonderful lesson right here in the start of the podcast. I love that. I started taking language lessons when I was 30. I decided to take Spanish.
Oh.
I just recently signed up for writing classes. I think just, going against those, quote unquote norms, right? And doing what you love, what you wish to do is part of your authentic self, is becoming and honoring your true self, right?
Yeah. And the willingness to be a lifelong learner, that's a really successful indication of our attachment styles. It's a very good indication.
And when you were a kid, so you always, first of all, you grew up in Alaska, is that right?
That's correct.
And were there no cello players or musicians there? Did you wanted to take lessons and your parents said no?
I took clarinet. I played clarinet when I was small. So it wasn't my choice. It was my parents' choice. And so it wasn't really a passion.
Yeah. And like you said, when you don't have to perform for someone or there is no outcome, you're just doing it for sheer pleasure. It just makes it so much more meaningful and wonderful, right?
Yes.
I also don't like to play for people the piano.
Oh.
When I play for people, I make a lot of mistakes. Even though I composed a specific song, I still make mistakes.
Oh.
Because the pressure from outside is huge.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I know you're trained in nonviolent communication, which is one of my favorite things in psychology. And we had several guests on the podcast who have also been trained with Marshall Rosenberg. And you had an honor of meeting him. Is that right? You took a seminar with him?
Yes, I was one of 100 people, so I didn't exactly meet him, but I did get to be in the same room with him before he passed on. And that was very inspiring. And also, it was towards the end of his teaching. And so he was at that time already beginning to suffer from dementia. And his teaching was exactly the same as what I had heard on his CDs, which I had memorized. So then I was like, gosh, here I've signed up for a 3-day workshop with this man, and I've already memorized everything that he's saying. What will I do? And that actually was the starting of everything that's happened ever since, was that I already knew what he was going to say. And so somebody stood up and said, come do a live empathy circle with me. And I thought, what is an empathy circle? I will go do this. And I had a transformation experience. And I was like, wow, how come NBC transforms my brain when my brain's never been transformed before? And so then I started studying the neuroscience. So it was actually good that Marshall was repeating himself.
So that's what I wanted to know. What came first for you? Was it NVC or learning about the brain? But you just answered that.
Yes.
And what was your impetus of wanting to learn from Marshall Rosenberg? What led you to him? I mean, that was many years ago, right? When there were no podcasts, blogs, and all of that. Right. Like you said, there were CDs. How did you even acquire those CDs?
I got them from my public library and listened to them while I was driving.
And what led you to it? Did you read a book? I'm curious what was happening in your life at that time.
The blurb on the back of the CD set said that it was really important to know this stuff in order to make change in the world. And so I thought, well, I'm very interested in change in the world, so I will get this CD set. I'm somebody who's just an incredibly dedicated library user. I'm an insane library user. So that's the way I found it, was just on a book rack.
Wow. And look where you are now, right?
Yes. It's funny what happens to us.
Yeah. And how did you stumble upon or discover neuroscience?
Well, after I walked out of that room where my experience had been shifted by the simple and strange experience of a circle of people, nobody giving me advice. Nobody was giving me advice. They were just guessing my feelings and needs, which is the core sort of central element of nonviolent communication. I was like, what's this? What is happening? I'd never not received advice. So it was an awakening. And I thought, what's going on? I'm always just so curious. I'm a curious person. So I was like, okay, well, let me see what I can find out about what happened and why. And that was how I came across Matthew Lieberman, whose beautiful article, a neuroscience research article, but he's from UCLA. He wrote an article called Use Your Words. And it showed that when people named emotions, their amygdalas decreased, the amygdala activity decreased. when they named the correct emotion. And I was like, oh my God, what a wonder. And now, just recently, I just discovered some research that shows that the more we know what our emotions are, the more securely attached we are. So the more we give our kids experiences, really naming their emotions, which means we actually have to be warmly curious. Because if we don't want our kids to be angry, then that's going to be reflected in the way we talk to them. Or if we don't want our kids to be sad, then we'll go right to fixing. We won't pause and determine, oh my goodness, of course you're sad. So it's quite a thing to step into the world of emotions. They are a big litmus test for how we are doing relationally.
And so, yeah, Dan Siegel, we had Dan Siegel on the podcast too. He always says, name it to tame it. But I've also heard contradictory research to that it's not a necessity to name it to tame it. You don't even need to know what you're feeling. You just have to feel it and ride the wave and let it go.
No, whose research is that?
I can't remember. I was trying to recall that. I'm not going to say that was debunked, this name it to tame it, but what I remember, or maybe it was from a podcast guest. I was trying to remember this for our conversation, but I can't. I have to do some more research or more thinking. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Right? So name it to tame it helps us. It comforts us. It calms our nervous system.
It makes us securely attached.
Yeah, but are emotions really valid? Or do we need to name them or give them meaning? Or they're just like energy that come and go? Why should I even be worried that this is frustration or this is annoyance? What's the difference? It's there, right? I'm just making like a discussion point here.
Yes.
What is your personal view on this? Do you think it's helpful to name it?
Yes, very helpful. My personal experience with people who are promoting the ideas that you're advocating for from your devil's advocate position are that those folks are avoidantly attached, and they don't want to name their feelings. The insulation layers from avoidant attachment are firmly in place, and they don't find that there's any benefit or any good things that come from naming their emotions. Now, Matthew Lieberman did another beautiful piece of research where he asked a bunch of people before they got in the fMRI machine if they thought that naming their emotions would calm them. And they said, no way. It doesn't help me at all to name my emotions. Then he stuck them in the MRI machines. And when they named emotions, the activity in their amygdalas fell. So there's a lot of avoidant attachment in our world, and it's becoming a larger and larger percentage of the people that we meet. So, of course, there are people that believe that it's not supportive to name emotions. But in my own personal experience, and according to the research that I have read, it's extremely helpful.
Yeah. But is it, can we pinpoint or approximation of the emotion? Again, I'm going of this thought, and I hope I won't annoy you with this. Is it really, I mean, can we really pinpoint what we're feeling? Because feelings come sometimes just out of the blue, right? You might be having a good day, and then all of a sudden you're feeling anxiety, or you're feeling a certain way. Is it really necessary in that moment, or can we pinpoint even, or it is so morphed with a bunch of other emotions or bodily sensations? I think I know who said that now, that there is a guest on the podcast. Yes. And she wrote a book about emotions. Now I know who this was.
Yes, it's a very avoidantly written book.
Okay, I have to go and read that again. I'm not going to stay on this topic too long. What I'm interested is, say, the alarmed aloneness, that the term that you coined is just like such a alive term, right? Alarmed aloneness.
Yes.
It just speaks to every one of us. So when did you discover alarmed aloneness?
Well,
Tell
really,
me a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. Really, Jaak Panksepp is the one who discovered alarmed aloneness as its own distinct emotional experience. Jaak Panksepp was a marvelous emotions researcher who worked all through from about 1950 until 2010. He passed on, and so we don't have him with us anymore. But his work remains, and so beautiful. And one of the things that he discovered was that in every mammal, there's an emotional circuit that is what he called the panic grief circuit. And he was talking about how there's an alarm state of the panic grief circuit that's true for all mammals when their mothers disappear. If the mother's forcibly removed from them or gets injured or is killed, the baby animals have a terrible time. And a little bit of it might be fear and a little bit of it might be anger, but really what they're experiencing is, we can use the word separation anxiety, but the word separation anxiety are used derogatorily so often. And the word abandonment is also a very good word, but it also has kind of this implication that somebody has abandoned us. But what's really important is to start to notice that we have the capacity to be in an alarm state when the people that are important to us are gone for whatever reason. And so I like the term alarmed aloneness because, as you said, it gives us a feeling for what this is, whereas separation anxiety and panic grief don't quite touch it the same way.
Wow, what an interesting way of explaining it. And it does make sense like that. You're right. So what are the signs of alarmed aloneness if someone is listening? And it sounds like most of us have or had alarmed aloneness.
We are marvelously social. So my book talks about this a lot. My book, Your Resonant Self, talks about this a lot. And the Your Resonant Self workbook talks about this a lot. So if you're interested, then that's a source for you. But there's a fellow who's done some amazing research at the University of Virginia. His name is James A. Cohen. And what he has discovered is that we are changed by whether or not there's somebody with us. We are changed. The way we perceive the world has changed. How much pain we register when we get hurt is changed by whether or not we're accompanied. And the way we perceive effort, like how hard will it be to climb this hill? How hard will it be to do this task? Is also changed by whether or not there's somebody with us. So
is that his research when there is a mountain they have to climb and they estimate if they are alone, they misjudged the difficulty of climbing.
Steep,
yeah.
So his work really speaks to us about the way in which we're made to be relational. We're made to have somebody else right here with us. We're not made to go it alone. He even says that when we measure people, we're always in science, we're usually measuring people alone. We're not usually getting people with their peer groups, into a research room. So what we're seeing is people below their actual capacity levels when we measure them. So the more we're accompanied, the easier and better it is. And we miss people. And we go into an alarm state when the people are not with us. Our bodies change and work at a lower level of capacity and efficiency, but we also have to deal with a stress response for the missing people. And for some people, it's more intense, like who's missing, or a particular person is particularly important. And some other people have like a wider sense of community and miss more people. That seems to be pretty individual. But we all miss people.
Does it make a difference when this attachment trauma happened, that this separation, or when the alarmed aloneness originated? I mean, maybe that's not the right question, because you can experience it at all stages of your life, right? It's not like you experience it one time and that's it for the rest of your life. You can experience so many garden variety of alarmed aloneness. A young child may have been separated from their mother. That's a different one, but it doesn't mean that child that grows up and never experiences alarmed aloneness.
No.
So when is it more severe? That's what I'm saying. Want to know, is it when it originates in childhood? It sort of wires your brain a certain way? Or let's say you had a secure attachment, you didn't have any attachment problems or any attachment wound, but you were in your teenage years and that's when this alarmed aloneness happened. Who has a better capacity for healing? I don't know. Am I asking the right question?
A great question, because it takes us toward, this curiosity that we have about trauma and healing trauma. So when we're little, that's the hardest time to recover from alarmed aloneness. So if we're little and we lose a parent to death, then that becomes a huge task of healing that continues throughout our lives, because it's really something to lose a parent. And little ones who get adopted have also a huge task of healing, because their parents may not have died, but their parents are no longer available to them. So it's like a death.
Living loss, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but any time that there's a traumatic loss, it will be registered in the brain. We can have lived till we're 80 and have a traumatic loss and have it then be a trauma experience. But the more severe losses we experienced when we were little, the more vulnerable we are as we get older to experiencing an intensity of loss that becomes more and more difficult to sort of right our ship in response to. But it's all doable. We just need to be accompanied in our healing. We need therapists who are warm and understanding, and we need friends who are warm and understanding, and partners who are warm and understanding.
But a person who has this alarmed aloneness, do they often have self-hatred, self-sabotage, self-criticism, and therefore, because of this self-sabotage, they also don't want warm, loving people in their life. They sabotage their relationships.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. So two things, you make beautiful points. The first is that loneliness is hugely correlated with self-disgust. It's the biggest correlation with loneliness. People who are lonely tend to have self-disgust for their own loneliness, and then their self-disgust stops them from being able to form new connections, and then they're lonelier, and then they have more self-disgust, and it's just kind of a terrible line that goes down and down and down. And that's a part of what the book 2 really focuses on, is what kind of contracts do we make that create these ever-increasing patterns of pain and trauma and aloneness. And sometimes, it's purely situational. But sometimes we stop ourselves from new connections because we've made an agreement with ourselves never to have connections again, because our heartbreak was too great and we don't want to just be destroyed by loss. So we just won't form any connections, and then we won't be destroyed by loss. So those kinds of contracts are hugely important to release. And the other way that this shows up is in a contract not to allow ourselves to be loved by humans. So one of the questions I always ask my audiences is, are you willing to be loved by humans? Are you willing to be loved by humans? Because if we're not willing to be loved by humans, then we have kind of a spiked fence that's all around us that stops us from being able to take advantage of the human capacity for connection.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest case then where do you start with that type of person who is not ready or willing to receive love from others? There was a good point in one of our discussions in our community that, do you have to love yourself to accept love from others, or do you need love from others so that you can love yourself?
What a wonderful question.
And I want to know your take on it.
I think it can come both ways, that someone's love can surprise us, and we can suddenly find ourselves becoming willing to be loved by humans because someone makes it through the spiked fence. And the other way can happen. We can go, oh my God, I have a spiked fence around me. Let me get that down. And people can do their work to become willing to say, so if the contract were, I, Sarah, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will not allow myself to be loved by humans in order to spare myself from the disappointment of their certain betrayal, no matter the cost to myself. And I say, okay, that was a good vow, kept me going for a couple of years there. Not so good now. This vow is creating that spiked fence. I'm not getting the friendships that I want. I think it's time maybe to let go of this vow. And then we can. But sometimes we need the level of betrayal and disappointment to be named before our bodies are willing to let go.
You mentioned contracts. I would love for you to say what you mean by that, and you address them in your book. What do you mean by contract? What is a contract that we make with ourselves? And can you give an example?
So the amygdala, which is where the feeling stuff comes up from the body, that relaxes when emotions are named, according to the research of Matthew Lieberman and according to the research of Jaak Panksepp and according to Daniel Siegel. When the amygdala hits a trauma experience, the amygdala takes all of the experiences that are part of the trauma and glues them together. And when there's trauma, the amygdala is issuing a flow of cortisol, which shuts off the hippocampus, which is an ancillary memory organ that's right next to the amygdala in the brain. And that when the cortisol is shut off, we don't get to contextualize anything. So the amygdala has no sense of time, and the hippocampus is the time stamper. So if the hippocampus is turned off by the flow of cortisol from the amygdala, then what happens is that the amygdala just kind of takes all the trauma and makes it into a little ball that is waiting like a landmine within our brain. And we stumble across any element connected to the trauma, and boom, the landmine explodes, and we're having that intrusive memory that comes with trauma. So boom, there we are. But part of what's in this ball are the thoughts that we had. So for example, if I have a friend and my friend decides she doesn't want to see me anymore, then that's a trauma experience. And trauma experiences happen when we're alone. And if a friend leaves us, then we're alone without them. And so, of course, there's going to be a trauma bubble right there, a trauma knot. And part of the trauma knot will be, I will not make friends again, for example. I will not make friends again in order to keep myself from ever having to be heartbroken like this again. And then we get to discover it. And what's really important about these contracts is we make them no matter the cost to ourselves. I will never make friends again in order to keep myself from having to live through this heartbreak, no matter the cost to myself. And then we can go, oh, there is a cost to this contract. And we can even say to ourselves, Sarah, I release you from this vow. I revoke this contract. And instead, I give you my blessing to make friends, to keep making friends, and to trust that you have the skills and abilities and resilience that you need to survive heartbreak.
Just like that? Do you think it would be enough for someone who's been sort of governed by that contract to let go?
When we start doing this work, people tend to be very full of integrity. And they tend not to be able to say that they're going to let go if it doesn't feel like they can. So people will sometimes take 3 years to work on a contract before they start to let it go, because it's very important. It's been very important for their emotional survival. But sometimes they're ready, once they see the sort of the cost. Part of the work is like going, oh yeah, that's not a good cost. I may be thinking I'm keeping myself from heartbreak, but really what I'm keeping myself from is rich connection and possibility.
I recently had a client who said she doesn't have any positive memories from her childhood. When you spoke about the amygdala and the hippocampus, her childhood was severely traumatic. And I've never met anyone who said that statement. We all have positive memories that we can retrieve. And it was very startling for me. I didn't even know what to say to that, right?
Yeah.
She says, I have no single memory, positive memory from my childhood. I don't remember anything good happening in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt so deeply sad for this person. But when you said that, it makes total sense, right? The amygdala. And she lives her life with those kind of contracts, probably. God knows what kind of contracts
Yeah.
today that don't serve her, right? That it's still happening. Almost the amygdala is probably telling her there is no good thing. There are no good memories, right? And it's probably churning that same thought pattern so that she will be stuck in that.
Well, one of the beautiful ways that we can respond when people are trying to give us a sense of the magnitude of the trauma and the horror and the neglect and the aloneness that they have lived through is to begin to try to quantify it, like to begin to use metaphor and language to give people a sense that we understand the enormity of what they've lived through. And this can be true with a client, and this can be true with a little kid. A little kid can come home and say, I have had the worst day of my entire life. In which case, it's not very helpful to say, oh no, this wasn't the worst day of your life. That's a harmful way of thinking. Instead, it's much more helpful to say, oh my goodness, let's count up the bad things that happened. And we can have this response also with clients who say, I've never had a good memory. We can say, let's make sure we understand the magnitude of what you've survived, that there was abuse, that there was neglect, that you lost your parents, that your sibling died, that, just like, of course, there's no, it's a much different way to be of like, of course, this is the worst day of your life with a little kid. And of course, you would have this sense that there was nothing good that ever happened. It's just a different way of accompanying each other. And it tends to take a certain kind of deep faith that what others tell us is an effort to find accompaniment, rather than what others tell us is the God's truth and must be contradicted.
Oh my gosh, just bravo what you just said.
Yeah.
Amen. I think if we were raised like that, if we were taught this, we wouldn't, it doesn't apply to only parenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just across the board. When you said that circle, the empathy circle, that's all we yearn for one another, to use your word. We want a resonance with another, but we're so ready to offer a solution, fix the problem. Here I am. I have millions of ideas. You're suffering. I have solutions. I have the places to go. It's so interesting. It's just like we need to tattoo this somewhere, just to know that we're just yearning for that accompaniment, resonance, attunement. Just be with me, and when you be with me, I will find the courage to solve my own problem. Right?
Yes.
It's inside me. I know it's there. Don't disempower me with your ideas and advice and solutions. We do this to our kids oftentimes.
Yes, we do.
To other adults too.
Yeah.
But it comes with good intention, correct?
Yes.
Of course. Speaking about negative things, I have a friend who is going through a very difficult time right now. She says she's depressed, and her therapist gave her an assignment to write down 3 positive things that happened that day. So in the end of the night, she needs to write this down so that she can have some positive outlook or see the positive in her life. And just the other day, she says to me, I have a hard time. I can't find anything positive in my life. There's nothing happening in my life. I said, she's like, I forgot to do my assignment. I said, well, maybe while we're walking, you can tell me verbally, what happened yesterday. She thought, and she finally came up with 2 things. And the third, she had a very hard time. And I just stopped her. I said, listen, you just gave me like big events that happen during the day, but how about like little moments, ordinary
Mm,
moments that are like pleasant and
mm.
beautiful. It doesn't have to be like a significant big event that you consider
Yeah.
something positive. And she was very startled by that.
Yes,
And
yes,
I
that's
said,
so
let's
wonderful.
start this today in this moment.
Mm,
Like we're walking together on the beach. It's a beautiful day, breezy. Do you feel
mm.
that? Can you allow yourself to feel that? She's like, no, there's nothing. So far, she says, Anna, nothing has happened good. I don't know what kind of a positive person you are. So far, I haven't experienced anything good today. It was very interesting how she perceives the world.
Well, this is, it's a cry for accompaniment, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
what is it like to just go, well, I'm thinking about everything that you're up against. And of course, it would be hard to think of good things. Do you need some acknowledgement that all of the bad things are so big that they even stop you from being able to perceive the world?
To use the language of nonviolent communication, do you think people who need this accompaniment, of course, they don't choose the wisest or effective ways of asking for it, right? We choose all sorts of ways of complaining,
Complaints, complaints.
complaints. Complaint is number one. Do you think if we were taught the language of needs from a young age or from whatever age, do you think it would make a difference in our life? Do you think more people will feel less alone? They would know how to ask instead of kvetching, complaining, brewing in the same issue for months and years.
Yes, I think it would help everyone. Yeah. Because
How
it gives our friends something specific to do when we're so distressed. Like, just think how much easier it would be for you if your friend said to you, don't think of anything good. Tell me the 3 bad things that you noticed already for me today. That will help me. If you then you would know that you were helping, you would be able to go, oh, I saw that you stubbed your toe and we lost your keys for 10 minutes. And the person at the coffee store gave you the wrong drink, and then there would be like, you would know that you were doing what your friend wanted and your friend probably would end up laughing. Because that's what we do when we're accompanied in these difficult things.
So at the root of this, we all want to avoid this alarmed aloneness, but we're so scared to ask for resonance, attunement, connection, accompaniment.
I think we don't even know what it is. It's like it's not even a thing. So how could we even know to ask for it? People just don't even have the experience of receiving it. Just like me walking into that empathy circle going, what? No advice? It was completely unfamiliar. Yeah.
You're right. Receiving is another aspect of it. If you have never were given, right? How can you receive it? You have had practice. You have to have learned that this is part of the relational experience, giving and receiving. But if you were never given attunement, love, care, affection, attention, or resonance, it's like a foreign language. It's like you learning to play cello at age 50.
Yeah.
Right? It's possible. Right? We can still learn to receive at any age, but it won't be the same, probably. I mean, comparing to your cello playing, you're still good at playing the cello and you're enjoying it. But if someone was taking cello lessons from the time they were 5, right, there is a certain mastery that they have.
Yeah.
So same is true about all of this stuff.
Yeah, resonance. Yes, absolutely.
So what is resonance? You say that it's very different than empathy.
Well, empathy can be just a one directional, like I can have empathy for you without you consenting or saying, yes, that's a right guess. I can just have empathy or compassion. I can drive on the street and see a couple fighting and have empathy for them. or compassion for them. Or I can see someone who's homeless and I can houseless and I can have compassion for them. And yeah, so empathy can be just a one way, like heart radiance. But for resonance, there needs to be a yes. I need to be like, Anna, I wonder if you might be experiencing some distress, and if you really want your friend to be okay, if you really care about your friend and get worried about her. And then how do you respond?
Yes.
Yeah, so there we have a little bit of resonance.
Yes.
Because you said yes. I've made a guess. It had a real question mark at the end of it. And you said yes. So we're starting to create then a resonant field where you are understood. And that's for me the difference between empathy and resonance, is that resonance means there are two people in the experience and not just one broadcaster.
So you're such a science lover, curious person, avid reader. I'm one, and you remember a lot of studies. Like you can quote studies. Like I've only known one person who does that. That's Adam Grant.
Mm-hmm.
You house all those things in your brain. What's the most recent discovery or thing that you've learned about the brain?
Yeah, this piece that I just referenced about secure attachment, and I don't actually remember the researcher, but but I was so struck by it that that the more people can name their emotions, the more securely attached they are. I just was like, wow, this is beautiful. I have not seen this research before. The work we do with naming emotions is so health-giving.
It means the parents, of this person, when that person was a child, they were naming feelings, coaching them through their feelings. Therefore, they have a larger repertoire of feelings. Therefore, they probably were in a secure relationship with their parents, right? It totally makes sense.
And so many of us, had to grow up without that. So it's very good to know that these fibers in the brain, these neurons in the brain that hold this information and that connect with the amygdala are the most neuroplastic of any fibers in the brain.
That's great news. Yeah.
So when we're 80 years old or 90 years old, we can meet somebody who's like, George, I bet that you're feeling a little annoyed right now and that you'd really, really love respect. And George will go, yes. And that will be a resonant moment that will grow the neurons that we're talking about. So George can become securely attached at the age of 90. We all can.
Oh, so starting this process of naming feelings with someone, could it be on our own? Can we do the work on our own, or it has to be in the context of the other?
Well, I wrote the books in the hopes that they would at least be a start for people, to start people doing their work on their own. Because, of course, sometimes we have that spiked fence that's, erected around us and we're not ready to let it down. Or there are circumstances, that leave us alone in ways that we don't want to be alone. And so either way, we may need to be able to work on our own for some time. And so that's what the books are dedicated to, is to an experience so that the books hopefully are a little bit like another person that's holding us.
Yeah, it's very compassionate. Yes, you write about research, brain science, but those meditations in the book are very warm and comforting. It's like having a nice, comfy blanket. You juxtapose these two parts very well in the book. And even your writing, I have to say, it's very poetic, even though you write about the brain and the amygdala and all of those things. So I find that very comforting. It's a lovely way of connecting to your writing. So I want to ask you also about family constellations.
Oh, yes.
Do you practice family constellations? You have a training in that, right?
Yes. I'm a facilitator and a teacher of family constellations, and I love to integrate relational neuroscience into family constellations so that we're thinking not just about like our own amygdala in this generation, but what was our mother's amygdala doing in her generation, and what was our grandmother's amygdala doing in her generation? How did we pass brain patterns from generation to generation? How are the brain patterns that have been passed connected to collective and historical trauma? What's happened in our family line? How much migration has happened? How much famine? How much war? How much genocide? How has this impacted the alarm state of the family? How much alarmed aloneness is there? How many grandmothers and mothers died when the children were young? If there's a death of a mother when a child is young, there's a terrible alarmed aloneness that gets passed from generation to generation.
Mm. Yeah, I find family constellations pretty interesting. I participated once in a session at Omega Institute, and I found to be like my mind was blown completely. It was such an interesting experience to see how others healed.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of this group, and it was very, very mind blowing. But the potential for healing.
Yes.
I've also heard that you say healing is like an orange. It has different segments that connect to the center.
Yeah. Yeah. And that white stuff that goes down the center, it's shared by all the modalities. The healing is the same. And each of the different orange segments take us in a different way. There's resonance as an orange segment. There's somatic experiencing. There's massage therapy. There's the hypnosis. There's sound healing. I don't know, but it all goes to the same center.
What has been the most helpful for you personally, if you were to name 3 modalities that you found very transformative?
Well, the power of resonant language has been the most transformative modality that I've worked with. And then I've loved hypnotherapy, and I have also loved EMDR.
You've personally experienced EMDR?
Mm-hmm.
And you felt the benefits?
Yes.
And when you say the language resonance, can you elaborate on that a little more?
Yes, it's the same. It includes nonviolent communication empathy, and also includes impossible dream guesses and metaphor guesses. It's all of the different kinds of language that involve the right hemisphere. So mostly our language center is in our left hemisphere, but the right hemisphere alerts to different kinds of language. And when language is used in a way that alerts the right hemisphere, we're starting to engage the part of the brain that can heal trauma. So the experience of being held with resonance by somebody else who's not shifting left, not going into instrumental language, not going into advice, not going into dismissal, not going into comparing, not going into judging, but staying with, can I accompany you? That's sort of allows what's happening to stay largely in the right hemisphere. And that's where we rewire the amygdala's connection to the hippocampus and the way that the hippocampus contextualizes our life story. So that, and this happens for so many people, like your client, who have this sense that there's nothing good. Once we start to acknowledge the really bad stuff, then the hippocampus can start to remember, oh, and there was a kind neighbor. Or, I did this beautiful piece once with a woman who was in a trauma state. She said, I was thrown off the road and my car was pinned between 2 trees. She said, and I was alone for 2 hours waiting for help to come. And as we started to do the trauma work, which is providing accompaniment through time travel, she said, oh my God, I'm remembering that a neighbor came out of a house and stood with me and was actually with me. But before we started to do the encompassing and the holding of the traumatic experience, she had no memory of having been accompanied. So for all of us, when we say, it's a terrible thing, there are no good things, when we start to have the terribleness of it held, then our hippocampus can begin to say, oh, and there was this good thing. There was one nice moment. We start to find them. It really rewires our brain extraordinarily.
Wow, that's so powerful. That is so powerful. And that can be done. I think it's hard to do it with yourself. This kind of work is hard to do by yourself, right? Someone has to
Yeah.
be there to hold space for you, to ask you questions, hence the value of therapy.
Yes, indeed.
Are you familiar with Dr. Dick Schwartz, Parts work,
Yes, very familiar.
IFS? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you incorporate his work, or you're
No,
just
no.
aware of his work?
But a lot of people take my work and bring it right into their parts work.
Mm. Well, just to conclude our conversation today, I mean, there's so many things I would love to know about. You have a very interesting story, personal story. And I have notes here. I wanted to ask you about your adopted son.
Yes.
But we have to do round 2 if you're open.
Oh, yes, I'd love to. Thank you, Anna.
To go deep into some other aspects. You're such a rich resource and have such wisdom, and the way you think or explain things is just it's very wonderful. So I thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Anna.
Sharing this space with me. It was fantastic to hear you speak, and your calm and warm presence, your words, your language. So thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What's your biggest takeaway? Did you find this conversation useful? What do you think of this expression, alarmed aloneness? It's really powerful, isn't it? As always, I would love to hear from you. If you have a comment, question, general feedback, or if you just want to say hello, you can reach me at info@authenticparenting.com. You can call the number 732-763-2576. And for you, my international listener, I have a free tool on the contact page of my website, authenticparenting.com/contact. If you enjoyed the podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. It takes only a few seconds, but it's also helpful, or by becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can support your favorite podcast and get supporter-only benefits and content. To learn more, visit patreon.com/authenticparenting, or just click the link in the description of today's episode. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and elsewhere. And you can connect with me on Instagram, authentic.parenting.podcast, the only social media platform that I use. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seawold. Thank you so much for listening.